It is a strange feeling to see your work being discussed by tens of thousands of people. It is even stranger when the work they're all discussing isn't actually the one you created. This video is less of a response and more of a case study. We're going to look at what happens when a piece of criticism is taken out of its original context, misrepresented by a much larger voice, and then released into a passionate and often divided community. The chain of events that followed says very little about me or any single creator. It does, however, says a great deal about the states of online discourse itself. And like any story, this one begins with a single piece of content. But before we get into it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because this one will be one hell of a ride. A little while ago, I published a video called How Genshin Impact Sells Disappointment. The goal of that video was to look under the hood of the game. The analysis wasn't about the story, the characters, or whether the game is fun or not. It was a look at its core design, the systems and the gacha that shape how you play every day. It was a critique of Genshin Impact specifically. I want to be clear about that because it was a self-contained analysis of one game, and one game only. I did not compare to any other game. The video did what I expected. It started a conversation, but then it was noticed by a much larger creator, 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗵𝗁, and the conversation took a very different turn. He posted his thoughts on Twitter, and as you can see right here, he frames my entire argument as this simple, tribalistic take. Genshin is Satan, and Wuthering Waves is the promised land. A classic online feud. There is only one problem. My video never mentioned Wuthering Waves, not even once. The entire foundation of this public response, a response that was seen by over 300,000 people, was based on a subject I never discussed. It was a reaction to a video that doesn't exist. And that leads to the first real question. Why did this happen? And when the original tweet was met with criticism pointing out the factual error, Mr. 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗵𝗁 did not address the discrepancy. Instead, he immediately went on the defensive. He claimed that his post was being misrepresented, that people were failing to understand his real point. He then offered this clarification. I am literally saying, if you're a Genshin hater, woo a glazer, keep at it and have fun, bro. This became the first key development. It wasn't a clarification, it was a reframe. A clarification attempts to clear up confusion. A reframe attempts to retroactively change what was said. The original tweet's condescending tone, the language of haters, Satan, and Promised Land is completely ignored. The new official story is that the message was simply a casual, encouraging, have fun, bro. More importantly, this reframe conveniently sidesteps the foundational error, that his entire premise was based on a game my video never even mentioned. This is a classic tactic of, wait for it,
I'm good at
blame shifting. Instead of taking accountability, which, let's be real, who is taking accountability in 2025, am I right? The blame for the misunderstanding is placed entirely on the audience. The problem was never about what he wrote. The problem was that you were, in his words, brain dead for not understanding it. Hey, bravo! Bravo! This is, oh my god. This was his first attempt to control the narrative, and it would not be his last. When the blame the audience approach failed to silence the criticism, the defenses began to shift, leading to a cascade of contradictions. First came the intellectual defense. The new argument was that the original tweet wasn't a simple misrepresentation, oh no, but a subtle analogy that was too clever for people to understand. Oh my god. Second coming of Io, who is the glue in the Hoyoshill systems? It is you, 𝗖ecie𝗽𝗆𝗵𝗁. Bingo, get him the money, guys. Oh wait, he doesn't have Twitter Blue, so he's doing all these rage bait for nothing, for no money. Oh my god. Imagine this, in the span of an hour, the tweet had transformed from a message so simple it was quote-unquote literally just have fun, to a metaphor so complex it went over your head. This is a form of, wait for it,
I'm good at
gaslighting, accusing someone of inventing a narrative for simply reading the words you wrote. How are you even doing this? How? And it gets worse, because when claiming intellectual superiority didn't work, the next pivot was to claim victimhood. The narrative changed again, and now the original tweet was suddenly something nice, an act of goodwill. The fault lies with the critics, who are so toxic they can't even accept a kind gesture. This tactic flips the script entirely. The person who made the initial misrepresentation is now the victim, and the people who pointed it out are the aggressors. The focus shifts from his actions to the supposed character flaws of your community, because let's look at it here verbatim. Like frick, if y'all are gonna somehow find a way to pretend you can't even fricking read just so you can keep objectively and fairly criticizing on Genshin players, even when they say something nice about you, don't go around wondering why nobody likes your community, lamau. Baffling. Oh my god, what a baffling response. And you know what? When playing, the victim didn't stick. Because of course it didn't stick. The final defense was to claim the whole thing was meaningless from the start. Confronted with the fact that I've also criticized Wuthering Waves, he ignores that point entirely. His new position is that the tweet was just a reflection on how it is fun to hate on things. This is an attempt to trivialize the entire conversation. By creating a false equivalence, it tries to drag a detailed evidence-based critique down to the same level as his own casual fun hating on a popular manhwa. If it's all just meaningless emotion, then no one has to be accountable. Oh my god, big brain. And so we are left with 3 mutually exclusive defenses. Hear me out. The tweet was a complex analogy, and it was a nice comment, and it was a meaningless joke all at the same time. Does that make sense? Hell no. And throughout this entire unraveling, through all the deflections and the insult, notice the one thing that is never ever said. He never addresses the foundational error. He never admits that the video wasn't about Wuthering Waves. Every single one of these arguments is a frantic attempt to distract from that simple, undeniable fact. But what happens when a distraction like this is released into the wild? The audience fractures, and the results provide a perfect snapshot of a modern online community. Why bring up Wuwa if it's not mentioned in the video? First, you have the group of people practicing media literacy. These are the people who did the simple act of checking the source. They saw the tweet, watched the video, and immediately identified the disconnect. They prioritized the good faith discussion grounded in verifiable facts. And it's a reminder that a significant portion of any audience engages in an intellectually honest way. And then there's comments like Kurobots or he has an agenda. You have the tribalist. For this group, the facts and the proof are irrelevant. This is a textbook case of us versus them. My critique places me in the out group, so my arguments are perceived as an attack. A core part of this attack is to discredit my motives, with the common accusation that I'm just a Hoyoshill who just uses Genshin for the controversy clicks because my rent is due, guys. There is an easy way to test this theory. We can just look at the data. You can look at my channel. Let's not act like I can't get views outside of these games. The fact is, my deep dive videos on Uma Musume Pretty Derby outperform both my Genshin and Wuthering Waves videos combined. My channel's success is built on analysis, not manufactured outrage like your Twitter post. And then there's also always a third group, the bystander, who claims a false neutrality. This is the mistake of treating two very different things as if they are the same. In a situation where one side is presenting facts and the other is misrepresenting them, choosing neutrality is actually a quiet vote for the misrepresentation. It is an intellectual disengagement that allows the original falsehood to stand. So make sure you look at both sides fairly. But you know what? The most revealing comments are the ones that try to paint me as inconsistent. In their world, you are either a loyal supporter or a hater. There is no middle ground. This user points out that I praised a recent update before I criticized the game, thinking that it's a gotcha moment. Oh, you got me? You got me, bro. In 4K HD ultrasound. The very act they label as hypocrisy, praising a game's strengths and critiquing its weakness, is the definition of an objective assessment. It makes you want to turn to them and ask, so you're saying I give fair criticism? They unintentionally wrote a perfect endorsement for my entire approach. But of course, not every reaction was a deep dive into logical fallacies. The situation also produced its share of absurdity, like the parody account of the Wuthering Waves CEO, 𝗖cie𝗽𝗆𝗆𝗿, chiming in to declare Wuwa as indeed the promised land. Well, let me tell you this, brother. The promised land is my bed. Get it? Because my bed, me and you, promise. No? You don't get it? But beneath the good faith and the bad faith and the absurdity, there is a constant pattern at play here. One that goes beyond just this single incident. In any massive gaming community, an archetype often emerges: the brand defender. These are the creators whose own brand becomes deeply intertwined with the reputation of a single game. They act as guardians of the community, and their content is often centered on maintaining a positive space and a good relationship with the developer. This role isn't inherently a bad thing. The problem arises when that loyalty leads to inconsistent critical standards. It is like having a referee who uses a different rulebook depending on which team has the ball. The same level of scrutiny is not applied evenly. While some deflect criticism of one game, I've made it a core part of my work to apply the same critical lens to all games, including the ones I enjoy. So while the narrative being pushed is that I am a Wuwa glazer, that label falls apart when you look at the evidence. My videos on that game have pointed out some issues, like the design problem of comfort creep, where new characters aren't necessarily stronger, but are so so much easier to play that they make older, more complex characters feel obsolete. In my opinion, I've also broken down the long-term dangers of systemic power creep from new mechanics like the outro buffs, which threaten to invalidate a large portion of the launch roster over time. The standard is the same for every game I cover. This begs the question though, why does this pattern of inconsistent standards emerge so often? The answer, as it often does, lies in the pressures that exist behind the content itself. To understand the content, you have to follow the money. There are unspoken economic incentives at play that shape the entire discourse. On one hand, there is a powerful incentive for unwavering positivity. A creator building their brand on a single game benefits from staying in the good graces of both the developer and the community. This can lead to sponsorships, early access, and a stable audience. It is the safe path. On the other hand, there is an equally powerful incentive for outrage. Drama sells. Hot takes and tribal arguments generate massive engagement, which on platforms like YouTube and Twitter translates directly to ad revenue and visibility. Genuine nuanced critique, the kind that takes time to research and requires an audience to think, is often the last profitable and the most risky path, getting squeezed out between the two extremes. So when a creator who attempts this middle path is publicly misrepresented and harassed, other creators take notes. This leads to a phenomenon where people begin to self-censor. They see the dogpiling and the bad faith attacks and quietly decide that the risk isn't worth it, sticking to safer topics. The long-term result is a content space with less diversity of opinion, where developers face less accountability. I need you, the viewers, to actually put the puzzle pieces together here. But the external pressures only work because they amplify the conflicts that already exist within the community itself. That brings us to the most fundamental part of this entire situation. It all circles back to a disconnect that on the surface seems completely illogical, and it makes you ask, don't we all want the same thing? Don't we want the game to be better? Why are we even fighting? The reason is that we're not actually talking about the same things. My goal is to start a conversation about improving a product for the players who invested in it, for the content creators that cover it. But that conversation gets derailed by four powerful underlying currents. First, for many, it is not just a game, it is an identity. When you critique a game, they don't hear constructive feedback. They hear an attack on their hobby, their community, and their personal judgment. Defending the game becomes the same as defending themselves. Second, there is a fear of a ruin escape. People play to get away from real-world problems. A critique about predatory monetization or flawed design feels like bringing the real world into their fantasy. They resist it not because you're wrong, but because your truth is uncomfortable. Third, and the third one, we don't all have the same definition of better. For a critic, better means fairer systems. For a casual player, it might just mean more story quests. For a high spender, the current system might already feel better because it rewards their investment with exclusivity. We assume we have the same goal, but we are often playing for entirely different reasons. And finally, there is the very famous sunk cost defense. Players with thousands of hours and dollars invested have a subconscious need to justify that investment. It is psychologically easier to attack someone pointing out the game's flaws than to confront the possibility that their time and money were spent on a compromised system. So the fight isn't really about the game's quality. It is a clash of these deeply personal, often unspoken perspectives. And in the end of the day, that is what this is really about. This entire chain of events is a small-scale example of a much larger struggle online. On one side, you have the nuanced, evidence-based critique. It is often complicated and requires your attention. On the other, you have the much more powerful forces of tribalism. Us versus them. It is simple, emotional, and it gets a lot of engagement. And that brings me to the reason I do this in the first place. People ask why I make these critical videos. It is not because I hate these games. It is the opposite. I make these criticism videos for the betterment of the space, actually. I want people to realize what they deserve as players. I want to push for better monetization, for better quality of life systems. I want better explorations. I want an actual loadout system. Criticism for me is an investment in the belief that something you enjoy can and should be better. When that feedback, that investment, is deliberately misrepresented by an influential voice, it sends a clear message to developers. You don't need to listen. Why would they? When their most passionate fans will silence any meaningful dissent for them, the community in the end is worse off for it. So I will leave you with a question to think about. What is the responsibility of larger creators when they choose to frame the work of smaller ones for their audience? But that is all from me, 𝗖cie𝗽𝗆𝗆, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.